Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Yeah. Very good. Excellent. So welcome to this meeting jointly organized by the two ad hoc committees, Truth and Memory and the Things That Make for Peace. So this is our first joint organized meeting, although we often share speakers. This must be about the seventh meeting, I think, this time, and just admit a couple of others. There we go. Oh, that's a really nice icon for Emily, I must say. Jointly we thought it was probably opportune to have a meeting dealing with the issue of where sovereignty lies in the wake of the whole business of the coronation and the whole superstition and tradition and developing the persona of King Charles to try and get everyone to unite behind this whole idea of service, dropping everyone's rights and interests in the sense of wanting to follow King Charles III, now of course Queen Camilla, or the Queen as she's now known. And so this is why we've organized this meeting. And who better to give the main presentation than Leslie Larkham? I think everyone knows Leslie. She's done some in-depth study and written some pieces on the whole political theory of the monarchy, really dating from the time of the English Civil Wars and the development of the theory of the persons of state, which Thomas Hobbes published in 1651. So we're very pleased that Leslie could speak to us on this topic tonight. That's obviously the main presentation. But after that, like, everyone can feel free to make their own contribution. We have some of the participants who've been thinking about this, what they can say already. So if there's any silences to be filled, they can jump in. We've got some, or at least one poem, maybe a couple, some background information. We've got a YouTube video which we'll show at some point, very short, almost light entertainment. But anyway, I think more or less all joined. I don't think there's anyone else waiting in the waiting room at the moment. So if that's okay, we'll hand over to Leslie and on the topic, sovereignty must lie with the people. Okay, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I must say thank you to the Truth and Memory Ad-Hoc Committee, and also to the Things That Make for Peace Ad-Hoc Committee for inviting me to speak. And I'd like to say a special greeting to all our friends up in Newcastle and the North, who were at that meeting where we first started talking about covenant thesis and Hobbes and so on. And I can't remember when it was now, but it was a few years ago now, and it's led to a whole lot of thinking and research subsequently that I've been doing and we've all been doing. So it's we've come a long way since then. So anyway, to talk about this subject, so the title being "In the Wake of the Coronation, Sovereignty Must Lie with the People." So I thought it's germane to look at this question of sovereignty. What does it mean to be sovereign? So I looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and they give the following definitions. They say, first of all, it's one possessing or held to possess supreme political power or sovereignty. Two, one that exercises supreme authority within a limited sphere. But it goes on to say, sovereign, the word sovereign, inverted commas, has everything to do with power. It often describes a person who has supreme power or authority, such as a king or queen. God is described as sovereign in a number of Bible translations. However, the word sovereign also often describes power itself. The word itself I've added there, so that they say it often describes power. To have sovereign power is to have absolute power. So nations and states are also sometimes described as sovereign. This means that they have power over themselves. Their government is under their own control rather than under the control of an outside authority. So the issue is that in Britain and in its empire and realms, the sovereign as person of state is supposed to represent the people, their values, and unity around those values. But the sovereign's values have always been those of empire, together with a display of the wealth and power that tradition represents. So if we just hark back for a moment to the thesis, which we are all now familiar with, that was put forward by Hobbes in his Leviathan in 1651. This was known as covenant thesis. So this was brought into being at the time because of the English Civil War, which was raging throughout England and indeed into Scotland at the time, and in Ireland. It was spilling into all aspects of life, and no one seemed to be able to put an end to it. And it was because the people were rising. So you had the Leviathans, you had the Levellers, you had the parliamentarians, you had various groups that were starting to place their demands and starting to say that they wanted a say in the running of the country and indeed in power. However, no one could hold sway at the time. So Hobbes put forward what was adopted, in fact, which was that the people should agree to give away their right to decide and effectively their right to power to representatives in the form of political parties. So at the time, the English Parliament had existed for some hundreds of years, but at the time it was always under the divine right of the king. So it was the right of the king to follow or not follow what Parliament decided. However, with this new arrangement, following the beheading of Charles I, it was then this covenant thesis was brought into being. So this meant that all persons were members of the state so long as they agreed to give over their right to decide things to the two main political parties, which in themselves were decided by the ruling elites. So with the restoration of Charles II, the idea that had been put forward in the Leviathan as the apex of covenant thesis, that there should be a fictitious person of state, which originally was thought that that could be a chair or it could be a book. It was decided that they would restore Charles II to power as the fictitious person of state. However, that he would now no longer be wielding the divine right of kings, but rather the power was placed in the hands of the parliament. So they decided that he would be king, and then he sits at the apex of this covenant between the parliament and the state and God. However, it's not straightforward. The way I've just presented it may sound like it was a very simple thing, but it wasn't. It's very complicated. They enacted, in order to give authority to the king, all sorts of rituals. And one of them is that he's anointed by God. So the power still rests with the parliament, but the king has its authority through this anointing. But the whole point of the role was that he was now supposed to be simply symbolic. He didn't wield power as such. He didn't make decisions. He was the keeper of the peace, or if you like, he was the fictitious person at the apex of the power. So theoretically, the king had the power to intervene where a resolution couldn't be made between the political parties. What it did do was it ended the civil war raging at the time. And everybody then, or society at the time, agreed to these arrangements. But the issue that needs to be understood is that whilst it's often touted in modern times that isn't England amazing because it had this democracy and that it gave democracy to the people, it's the contention of this talk that in fact, it concentrated power in the hands of the rich and the few, and it was enacted to keep the people out of power. And that's significant because it's what's raging today. So if you come to the modern arrangements, what is happening really is that in recent times, we've seen the whole breakdown and the collapse of these arrangements, which have been going for nearly 400 years in varying forms, and there's been various tweakings to it. However, we're seeing that the people are now rising again, and they are making their claims, and they are, there's the whole enough is enough movement. The people are out in force. I mean, it hasn't, I'm sure, escaped anyone's notice that there's something like 35 unions out on strike at the moment, including doctors, including lawyers, including most of the NHS, teachers, railways, various industries. Anyway, it's like so many sectors and workers are basically fighting and laying claim to not just their rights in terms of pay and rights to housing and rights to healthcare and things like that, but they're doing it in a very modern way and laying claims on the basis of what's necessary for human beings in a modern society. So they're laying the claims for all. And so in that context, you have to ask yourself, what's the role of a monarch? So what is this role then of this fictitious person of state? And, the role of the monarch comes under increased scrutiny as a consequence, because they seem to not only not be in tune with the demands and the demands of the time and demands of the people, but they seem to be trying to turn back the clock and act as a block to these very just demands of the people. So the question is, sorry, let me just find one of my notes. So the question is, how is the monarch now represented? So I'm going to come to this in a second. we need to look at what is this persona that Charles is trying to put forward and how is he styling himself. But before coming to that, I want to talk about just before the death of the Queen, that there was something rather significant, and it may not seem so. In fact, at the time, I didn't really pay attention, but there was a video made to commemorate her Platinum Jubilee, which you may have heard on May 15 won the Memorable Moment Award at the BAFTAs. And, you know, you think, well, what is going on here? This was the video of Paddington Bear meeting the Queen. And at first you think, well, that's kind of sweet. And, you know, there's the grandmotherly Queen Elizabeth II meeting, you know, an iconic figure in Paddington Bear, and, you know, who cares? But when you look into what this represents, the more you look into it, the more you think, my God, this kind of comes to emblemize, is that the word? Anyway, it's emblematic of all that is rotten to the core of the monarchy itself and the relations of the monarch to us, the people, and to Britain and the nation. So in the video, you have Paddington Bear coming to visit the Queen, and he's, as we come to know Paddington Bear, he's clumsy. He doesn't understand the traditions. He doesn't, you know, he drinks out of the teapot, just pours it into his throat. And then he takes out marmalade sandwiches out of his hat and he offers them to the Queen. And then she says, oh, no, I don't need those. I've got them in my handbag here. And so the whole thing is portrayed as though it's, you know, it's kind of nice and benign and whatever. But when you look into the origins of Paddington Bear, you discover that Paddington as a concept was written, the book of Paddington Bear was written in 1958, or was published in 1958. The author Bond started work on it in 1956 and then came to publish it in 1958. Paddington in the book is described as coming from deepest, darkest Peru. However, it was the case that he was originally going to come from deepest, darkest Africa. And the publishers advised Bond, the writer, that he couldn't say that. And why couldn't he say that? And the answer was that you just had the Notting Hill riots in 1958 as a direct consequence of the racism of the state and the complete racist behavior of the police and of the so-called teddy boys at the time. You had the whole kind of the rise of certain fascist movement at the time, which was carrying out the most terrible things against those who'd come over from Africa or the Caribbean. And what Paddington Bear as a story was seeking to do was to pose its equal and opposite. So Paddington comes from deepest, darkest Africa. And he finds himself without any culture, without any history. We know nothing about him. And he goes to Paddington Station, and a white middle-class family adopt him out of their kindness of their heart. And they decide that his name is way too difficult to pronounce. So they call him Paddington because they found him at Paddington Station. I mean, when you look at it, it's like the whole paternalistic attitude of the British state towards all its peoples, you know, but especially those who are coming from the various realms and colonies and the empire. And so here you have Paddington, and he comes to emblemize, is that the word? Anyway, I can't think. He comes to, what's the word? Sorry, Michael. Is it emblemize? Can you say that? Represent, thank you. Thank you. Oh, dear.
It's easy for you to say emblemize.
Anyway, so comes to represent all the peoples that the Queen is above. So what comes out in that video of Paddington is exactly this, that Paddington is the main thing is that Paddington has no personality or culture or history. You know nothing about him except that he's been civilized by a white English family. So when you see that then represented in the video with the Queen sat there having tea, it's like, oh, isn't she nice? The grandmother of the empire and of the realms and whatever, tolerating this idiot, you know, this kind of this insignificant nobody that is, but his one saving grace is that he's so servile. And he comes and he says, oh, I've just come here to wish you a happy platinum jubilee, and I hope you have a nice day. And she forgives the fact that he's just trodden all over her sensibilities and whatever. So the question then is, why do that? What was it? What's going on when they represent that? And that is at the center of everyone's thinking, like it's like she is meant to be the nation's grandmother, and she's benign. You know, there's nothing problematic. You know, and it totally diverts attention from.
Do you want the video?
Oh yes, please. Sorry, let's see the video so you can all see what I'm talking about.
Thank you for having me. I do hope you're having a lovely jubilee. Tea? Yes, please.
Never mind.
Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here. Later.
Who's about to stop? Thank you for the moment. Thank you.
That's very kind.
Oh, thank you. The sound wasn't terribly good, but I hope people get a sense of what that was about if you haven't already seen it. Anyway, what strikes me seeing that is actually it's a message of service, that Paddington is there. He serves a role, but he's also serving the Queen. So here he is, humble soul from the deepest, darkest Peru, as he's then styled, and he's coming along and he's paying his respects to the Queen. In other words, he's recognizing her as the sovereign, as above him, and as the ruler. And so he comes to pay obeisance. And so anyway, now I want to just shift. So because the message of service was the key message behind the coronation of Charles III. And the issue there is that the message of service that the king presented at the coronation is an attempt to perpetuate a constitutional order that is anachronistic and requires replacement on a modern democratic basis. So King Charles, the way that they've styled him and the way he's styling himself, I mean, if you remember in the actual words of the coronation, of his speech in the coronation, or his pledge to the nation, he says, "I am here to serve and not to be served." And again, the way it was done with the Archbishop of Canterbury reinforcing that message, it seems quite like he's a humble soul. Look at him. He's one of the most entitled people on the planet. He's one of the richest people on the planet, and certainly in his own right wields, or is trying to wield, his own power and whatever. But here he is pledging to serve the nation and to before God, to serve and not be served. But what they added into that speech, both him and particularly the Archbishop of Canterbury, said that all his subjects should do the same and follow his lead. In other words, we the people should also serve. And who do we serve? Or what do we serve? And the point, I think, behind that whole message was that the people should stop protesting and stop making their claims and saying enough is enough and going out on all their strikes and whatever. And they should stop doing all of this and just simply serve the needs of the nation, in inverted commas, which by inference is the needs of the rich and powerful. And by inference, the people should not make their claim to have their voice. They should not be making claims to power. So then this takes us to the next kind of conception then, which is what's the challenge that confronts the people. Because what is going on here is that what King Charles is now doing is he's styling himself as a non-elected president, or if you like, he's a monarch that has a role, and they're actually calling it a role as soft power. So I know that various other people are going to talk about this after I have, so I'm not going to go into it here. But what's going on is that by sleight of hand, the establishment are using King Charles to further legitimate the shift from power from the people and even from the parliament into the hands of the king and the monarch. And it's disempowering the people, and it's placing, it's creating a situation where the people cannot effect that. Anyway, they need to make that claim. So their claims are being marginalized, if not stopped altogether. So then you see that in what's happened since King Charles has become king, and there are all sorts of murmurings going on. For instance, the Constitutional Law Society have already published an article saying that he's out of order in the way he's been behaving. Because, just to give you two examples, straight after the Northern Ireland Agreement with Rishi Sunak and the Northern Ireland MPs, King Charles then, and also Ursula von der Leyen, King Charles then met Ursula von der Leyen within hours of that agreement, and by inference seemed to say that he was standing he was supporting a particular view. And the problem of it is that our monarch, if he's or she is the fictitious person of state, is supposed to be a symbolic role and have no direct power. So it really stuck in the craw that King Charles is having political meetings with political figures as though he's a president, you know, so in the way that the US president might meet or whatever. And then he goes to Germany, or he had gone to Germany before, and he met with the German president. And the German press, and indeed the US press, was describing that meeting as an example of soft power. So then if you go back and you look up what soft power is, you define that the UK Parliament, the Westminster Parliament, have actually been discussing a new notion and a new role for the king and indeed for Britain in the world, and they're calling that soft power. So they're trying to create a new situation which is definitely moving beyond the parliamentary democracy that we've known all this time, and it's moving towards a much more anyway. With other people can go into that, but essentially it takes power further away from the people, and then decision making is made by private interests and non-elected bodies, and then democracy is done to us. Anyway, as I say, we can talk about this, but the point is that as far as King Charles is concerned, it raises real problems. It's problematic that someone who is supposed to be a fictitious person of state, and who is supposed to be at the apex of all the political and constitutional arrangements, is behaving in an overtly political way, which shows that you could describe him as just one faction amongst others now contending for power. And that basically brings with it a serious block to our modern democracy. And it certainly acts as a block to the people's power. So then the question comes again, like, where does sovereignty lie? At the moment, what seems to be happening is it's almost like a coup in place, that they're trying to almost do away with the arrangements that we have. Well, the arrangements have broken down, but they're extracting from that this person of King Charles and almost bringing back into the notion that he's there by divine right of kings. So the anointing process was quite interesting in the coronation, because they went out of their way to show that he is a religious figure as head of the English, of the Anglican Church. But the whole thing, like it just doesn't wash, because throughout the various realms, like in Canada, for instance, they've actually taken out of their pledges and so on that he is the head of the church, because like the indigenous peoples and so on don't recognize him, and all over the world nobody recognizes him as head of their church. And now he is during the coronation affirming that he is definitely not, as he said, as a prince, he said he wanted to be the representative of all faiths and none, and he was told in no uncertain terms by the Archbishop and by the by the powers that be here that no, he is the head of the Anglican Church. And so there are all sorts of contradictions, and so it's this person that then now seeks to have a role on the political stage and to impose his right and oppose his will. And meanwhile, they are using the whole process of the coronation and trying to buy into the love that people may have had, or the respect that people may have had for Queen Elizabeth II, and try and style him in this sort of avuncular role, whilst using him to deny the people their right. And so as the leaflet said in this, it's necessary for the progress of society to now deal with this question that the monarch and the arrangements in respect to the monarch are acting as a block to the people's empowerment, and that is what the monarchy represents. So essentially, he and the monarchy are acting as a block to the people's power. And so in conclusion, it seems like the obvious thing that sovereignty must lie with the people.
Good. Superb. Thank you, Leslie. So many issues arise from that, but I think that seems to me the conclusion is very apposite, very correct. That it's really just an insult to the people's decision making, if you like, to have this monarch who's supposed to represent the whole values of the nation, so-called the nation. And one thing recently, because a couple of days ago was the 75th anniversary of Windrush, the Empire Windrush ship, and of course it's what the state wants us to remember or know about this Windrush generation is, and they keep saying it, how the Windrush generation contributed towards building Britain. So then Charles comes along and says it's a very special generation, meets, selected representatives of the Caribbean community, and just incidentally, everyone knows about the slavery of the human trafficking, which the monarchs were the chief protagonists. So Charles doesn't apologize for this. Of course they say how bad it was, but there's the emphasis is on how this generation contributed really to the values that Charles represented. And one thing I was going to mention there is not only the Caribbean Commonwealth Empire as was, but the fact that the British after slavery had Anglo-Indian or Indians, sorry, not Anglo-Indian, the people from the Indian subcontinent as indentured laborers in the Caribbean. Anyway, the whole everyone knows about the Windrush generation scandal, which is hardly talked about and Charles, as far as I know, never talked about it. But the fact that and our present government, Suella Braverman and so on, are the most vicious in saying that trying to brush the scandal aside and justify what they did. The scandal, the fact of the Home Office destroying documents and then asking the people who lived in Britain all their lives to produce documents. Anyway, that's the whole scandalous situation. But the point I wanted to make in this connection anyway is the fact that Charles has a very definite role in this, in trying to avoid British state, British ruling classes from being accountable for all these crimes against the people. Okay, so that's enough of that intervention. So it looks like Roger, sorry, yeah, do you want to come back, Leslie? And
well, yes,
Roger wants to say something.
I just wanted to add one tiny thing, that when I looked up the characters that were in the original Paddington Bear story, the person that's the protagonist, the next door neighbor, is called Mr. Curry. So it's almost like he's the Indian that lives next door that's really irritating, and the one that doesn't accept the status quo. Anyway, I just thought I'd add that. Like the whole thing is like a racist rant, actually.
Okay, Roger.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, I'd like to thank Leslie and the Truth and Memory, the Things That Make for Peace, for organising this important discussion and for doing it jointly with Truth and Memory. And I'd like to thank all those that have been active in the programme. Truth and Memory have come tonight, and I'm sure it will give us some impetus to continue our discussions and our work in the Northeast. And just to remind us that both ad hoc committees were formed 4 years ago and set out to uncover the real story behind World War One on its 100th anniversary of the end of that World War, and uncover Britain's role. And this was very different from the mass promotion that Britain was the innocent party and then victor of that war, and which was being promoted on the anniversary. So to uncover the truth and memory of those things on those times, and to show that Britain instigating the carve-up of German and Ottoman empires was really important, I think. And we both captured the wonderful photos and poetry and songs of that time. And as you know, Russia was also involved then, but with the October Revolution, that all changed. And at that time, Lenin and the Bolsheviks uncovered all these secret treaties and agreements that disclosed what the aims of the war were, including the carve-up of the Middle East by Britain. All very, very serious issues that led to the rise of fascism and the Second World War and beyond to today, and still troubling the whole world today. So I think that's very relevant. It's very relevant, I think, today's topic in uncovering the role of the king and the monarchy when Britain is in the forefront of escalating the war in Ukraine, and even more so that the US, even more so than US, I would think in many ways, and are doing it, of course, by using the outdated and archaic monarchy, which it thinks is to its advantage. And as has been said, the most important thing about the monarchy and King Charles' coronation was presenting him in this political role as soft power of the state. And Liz has mentioned it, the defender of the faith, but also not just religion, but militarism. The former he wasn't too happy about being presented as you said, defender of one faith, because it makes it very clear that the racism of the state, but they forced him to become, obey that singular allegiance to one faith, as you said. But the second, militarism, of course, he did not oppose. And at the coronation itself, you could say that was really emphasized. So Ben Wallace said at the time of the coronation in the press release that we can be enormously proud of the professionalism and precision of our armed forces as they honour His Majesty, their new Commander-in-Chief. Something which many of us may have forgotten, that he's actually Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces, and of course that is very important to this state. I was looking at one historian who's analysing why Britain retains such an outdated institution as the monarchy, and this historian called it British exceptionalism, because so many other countries have jettisoned their monarchy for presidents and so on. But she said it was an attempt to continue to act as a cover for Britain's warmongering ambitions in the world as part of, this. So they will continue to wheel out, they can continue to wheel out that the armed forces of Britain are fighting for king and country and not for the people, of course. So, in fact, Charles was, thrown into this straight away, which I think is important to mention, because he's well versed in that, because whilst he was prince, he has long been a salesperson for the British arms industry. And then, but in March this year, when he had been announced as king, obviously not crowned, his first visit abroad was, as king, was to speak to the German Bundestag. And beyond belief, there he was advocating that Britain and Germany should be united in escalating the war in Ukraine instead of striving to bring about a peaceful resolution, of course. So that was very marked. And of course, as you know, he intended to go to France as well, but of course the French people had their say and blocked him from going there. So he didn't. He would have tried to say the same message, but because of the uprising in France, partly against NATO, that didn't happen. And Leslie has spoken about the King's democracy, but I think to add that the King is a linchpin in the support for the US and British warmongering and their interests in Europe and the world, especially the British war industries, is really important to focus on, as well as we work to oppose their wars abroad. However, I think what's happening more and more is all these illusions about the Queen, and that you described it really well, Leslie, about the Paddington Bear, but all these, and it shows that the illusions about the Queen being mother of the English people and subjects is not being carried over to Charles. So the huge demonstrations that took place at the Coronation, I think, were really significant. Under the sort of "Not My King" and against the monarchy. And like some of you here, I remember watching the Coronation as a kid. And I remember a lot of people got TV in order to see it. But now, even with the censorship of the mass media, it's quite evident thousands of people opposed this archaic and outdated rule of the monarch and demanded a modern constitution to make their voices heard. So, that question is no longer, I think the question of the monarchy is no longer such an issue in Britain. I think the ruling elite are aware of it. I think that it's more or less decided by the repressive forces. What is the issue is, how do people empower themselves to influence and shape the new in society and give them a modern constitution that has an anti-war and pro-social government. And if you remember, in recent years, we had the project of Corbyn, of course, where the union members got to make decisions on Labour Party leadership. But that has now been sort of closed off. And then you could say many of us were not surprised. And what present parliamentary system is capable of in this present system of blocking Corbyn from becoming the King's Prime Minister, as it were, which is what he would have been. He would have been appointed by the King or the Queen at that time if he'd become Prime Minister, but they had no intention of allowing that. So I think that's, but I think that has come as a cost to them. The ruling elite, their king's democracy, the king in parliament, the so-called party system, which you could say has now degenerated to a political pro-war, anti-social consensus, has become even more exposed. And what has come into focus, you could say, is like the modern levelers movement. I think you're referring to going back to the levelers in the beginning of your talk, and it may not be in the army, but certainly in the working class movement, as you've described, that they're showing they're the creators of wealth and should decide. And therefore, the logic of this is that any new parliament should be focused on the people's sovereignty and their decisions, and not the person of state in the king, or even in the president when the king and monarchy falls, which it will in the future, of course. So those are some of the issues, I think, that are very pertinent to this question of how we organise and fight, concentrating on the issue of how we fight for a new society where people, more and more play their role and make their voice heard. Thanks very much for that and the contribution, Liz.
Okay, looks like Alan would like to say something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This kind of follows in some way what was just said, I think, because I'd like to say something a little bit about that kind of idea of completing the democratic revolution that was begun in those times at the times that Leslie's been talking about, the Civil War period and the levelers and so on. What does it mean in the present, if you like, to complete that democratic revolution? So, in the present, with the certain needs that are really posing themselves right now, there's the need to recognise the rights of all, and in particular to direct the economy to meet the needs of the people. It couldn't be more obvious than at the present that there's an urgent need to change the direction of the economy, and in general to bring the enormous productive forces under control and stop being in a state of, you could say they're directed in a factional and mutually contending way. And there's they've reached the point of such productive power that without those being under a more conscious control, we're seeing the results of sort of chaotic results of that situation. That the economy is unable to meet the needs of the people. It's unable to, society and the economy are unable to recognise and guarantee the rights of all. There's the effects on the environment, and there's the breaking out of war, and so on and so forth. So what's revealed through that, in one way or another, if you like, is the need for political power, particularly by the people that are engaged in production. And so, in other words, the majority of the population. And, you could say these discussions are part of that movement. Now, the sort of artificial person of state that Leslie was describing, that was the form of democratic personality, if you like, there's given rise to during the English Civil Wars. It arose out of those conditions to manage the various contending powerful interests. And so it had to do with the contradictions between various different factions, and also the contradictions between the individual and the collectives and society as a whole. Also, at that time, as has been mentioned, we had the levelers, who engaged in the party debates. There was that put forward at that time, the demand for sovereignty not to lie with Parliament or any other force, but with the people. So the debate began in earnest at that time on how people can decide and how the government should function. And so part of the point of that conception of democratic personality given rise to it at that time was to suppress the popular voice and to halt the continuing battle of democracy in favour of the newly ascending powers that came to be. But in the present, that's all in utter crisis. This personality reveals itself as anything but democratic. Its mask is off, if you like, in the present, and the ruling elite, barely follow their own constitutional theory, if at all. They're dominated by pragmatism these days, and increasingly resort to open rule by police powers and imposition. And we see also imposition in the way, for example, labour relations are going on between the social relation between employer and employed, the imposition taking place, the refusal to negotiate with unions and so on and so forth. So, but while these sort of old arrangements and underlying conceptions are failing, the new have yet to sort of fully come into being. And so the issue that poses itself today, which is like a challenge we face in some senses, is that there's a need for an entirely new conception of power. So all vestiges now of absolutism and the old notions of supreme power have to be replaced by a new truly human power that does not stand above the people, but as a power which is based at the base of society. So rather than sort of accommodating and managing competing interests and warring factions, instead it's the individual, collective, and society as a whole that need to be brought on a par. A conception of power that allows the harmonization of these interests. So to complete the democratic revolution, it means democratic renewal of the political processes and institutions to provide a directly democratic voice, so that people, rather than handing over their voice, if you like, to some fictitious person of state, speak in their own name, they directly form their collective will. And so the decision-making power and supreme decision-making power is directly exercised by the whole polity. And this needs modern arrangements that give voice to the people and enable the people to be the decision makers. So, if you like, more concretely, that means new mass democratic forms need to be found, new mechanisms of decision making with a mass character, whereby all members of the polity have equal rights and duties and sharing the decision making power as one. And you could say that in the present, like as was just mentioned, this really poses itself in this challenge to bring into being an anti-war government in Britain, because this can sound like simply a government which doesn't intervene around the world and things like that. But it's quite a profound conception, encompassing a government which is also pro-social and pro-worker, and it's a break deeply with governance based in civil war at home and imperialist war abroad. It's a form of governance which is about the harmonization of interests. So, in erecting the fictional person of state, the aim was to hide the actual relations between humans and nature, and what those relations reveal, which is the need to empower the people, and which involves working people speaking in their own name. And you can see this reflected, the need for this reflected in, for example, the current movement of working people who are proclaiming that enough is enough, and have been that's been transforming, if you like, the consciousness that exists, that working people themselves they're the ones that have the solution to the crisis. So this kind of points in the direction of a new outlook or a new framework of thought, which has fidelity to all these relations, recognizes that the need for political power is indispensable, and also is is internationalist. It's aimed at bringing into being a world of socialized humanity. So, sort of sum up really that to complete the democratic revolution means ensuring that the constitutional arrangements vest the supreme power in the people, not in the narrow private interests which rule over society for private gain.
Yeah, tremendous. That really goes into the subject. I mean, I don't know whether it helps to think of that image of Leviathan. You probably all know it. In which the people are all looking up to the head of this fictitious person of state. And the person of state is holding a bishop's crook and a sword, if I'm not mistaken. So it represents really, it's very graphic because, you know, as Roger was saying about the coronation and King Charles being head of the armed forces, it brings those two things together. This is the service of British Empire and militarism, and so I mean I don't think we've come up with the you know, so that's the Hobbes Leviathan. I don't think we've come up with the anti-Leviathan picture yet, but it has to be that the people are all there making the decisions together and not looking up to the person of state at the top. So
they came up with a Mobius strip.
Well, there is the Mobius strip, but it's kind of a bit tangential to this conception. But those that, I mean, you know,
Leslie explained it to our guys.
Explain it to me as well, so I feel I know something about it. But it is. I mean, I also like to add there's the Klein bottle if you take it into three dimensions. The only thing on that is that it's not. Like if you try and build a Klein bottle, there's one surface going through another. So, but it looks like a barrier, but you can still, in the theory, you can still go around and never come to an end. You're
it's like the universe as well. There's no middle, no edge to the universe.
May I just comment on that? I mean, no. I'm not on that, on the Leviathan image, because like what you didn't say, Michael, was that in the Leviathan image, the people are the chainmail of the body. They are the body. Yeah. So they are all looking up to the head, which is the Leviathan or king, but they are the body. So the point is the relations of the body to the head is that those who are members of the body are subservient to the head. The head looks down on them and they look up to it. So the point about even trying to postulate an alternative in the form of the Mobius strip is about the relations of person to person and persons to nature, is that you have a more equal relation, and it also is not a one-dimensional relation. So in the Leviathan, it was very explicitly putting the people in their place. and saying that you do not have a persona or an existence other than subservient to and looking up to those that rule over you, and that you only, if you like, you're there by sufferance. We're going to suffer you to be members of the body politic, so long as you agree to give over your demands and allow us, the few that sit at the head, to make those decisions. So then the question is how to that's what you're really saying. That's, Roger, your comment really, isn't it? It's like, what are the limits of those? Like, what are the relations, and how does one represent, like in a modern society, which Alan's just been referring to, like the relations are very, they're endlessly varied and are changing depending on the situations of whatever. But the point is that everybody should have their voice, and everybody does have their voice. So like, people are making their demands, and they are making their claims. So like, every single person, every human being has their claims and their demands, and they have their voice. And those voices exist in all sorts of spheres in relation to each other, and different spheres in relation, whatever. So it's not the hierarchical view that is being, that was posited and that was the solution found. And that's the problem of having a monarch, incidentally, because having a person that's no longer fictitious, but is an actual person, in a very flawed person of King Charles, means that it sort of is asking you to serve or not serve. It's like everybody has to declare their relation to him. And actually, in a modern environment, in a modern world, who cares? That's not the issue. So the issue is very much like you were saying, like in the militarism, you were absolutely right about this whole coronation and the whole way in which Britain is styling itself. I mean, they're pushing for war, aren't they? And they're being I think you said once that, Roger, that something like 90% of the UK economy is actually geared to arms manufacture and war production. So that tells you, we didn't hear about these things, but it's like, where are the people in all of that? So their power and their voice completely marginalized, if not completely like erased by these values, which are promoting this notion of that person there having the right to decide for all of us.
I think maybe one image toyed with, as it were, in countering the Leviathan image and bringing it to the present, is this idea of transform the world with 1,000,000 songs. And
can you show us that image, because it's such a beautiful image? That
I'll let someone else speak, and then I'll search it out. But it's also like the conception: the world as is has no takers. The world as it should be has billions of makers. So it's the same kind of conception that like the person of state represents the contempt of the ruling elite for the mob, whereas we represent the mob who have contempt for everything the monarchy represents, including the real sovereign, the monarch in the flesh. It's not simply symbolic. So I'll look for that image. And who else is wanting to come in? No hands raised at the moment.
Could Charlotte perhaps read that lovely poem? Lovely is not the right word, actually, but That's Benjamin Zephaniah poem.
You there, Charlotte? Where's Charlotte?
I am.
There she is.
I am. Right. Hold on a sec. I need to get my laptop up there.
It's difficult to go back to these Zoom meetings with getting used to face-to-face meetings.
So this is a poem by poet Benjamin Zephaniah called Bought and Sold. Sorry, I'm just trying. Smart, big awards and prize money is killing off black poetry. It's not censors or dictators that are cutting up cutting up there's something, hang on a second. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I can you give me a minute because it's not showing the full. There we are. Yeah, okay, yeah, I've got it now. I'll start again. Bought and sold. Smart, big awards and prize money is killing off black poetry. It's not censors or dictators that are cutting up our art. The lure of meeting royalty and touching high society is damping creativity and eating at our heart. The ancestors were turning graves. Those poor black folk that once were slaves would wonder how our souls were sold and check our strategies. The empire strikes back and waves. Tamed warriors bow on parades. When they have done what they've been told, they get their OBEs. Don't take my word, go check the verse, because every laureate gets worse. A family that you cannot fault as muse will mess your mind. And yeah, you may fasten your purse, and surely they will check you first when subjects need to be amused with paid-for prose and rhymes. Take your prize. Now write more, faster, fuck the truth. Now you're an actor, do not fault your benefactor. Write, publish and review. You look like a dreadlocks rasta. You look like a ghetto blaster, but you can't diss your paymaster and bite the hand that feeds you. What happened to the verse of fire, cursing cool the empire? What happened to the soul rebel that Marley had in mind? This blood-stained, stolen empire rewards you and you conspire. Yes, Marley said that time will tell. Now, look, they've gone and joined. We keep getting this beat. We keep getting this beating. It's bad history repeating. It reminds me of those capitalists that say, look, you have a choice. It's sick and self-defeating if our dispossessed keep weeping and we give these awards meaning, but we end up with no voice.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself for a moment. Oh, someone's found a million songs. Have a look. Is that the one? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to share the screen. see this. Back to share screen. There we are. That's transforming the world with a million songs. So that's anti-Leviathan. Think together. This must stop. And if you want to know what those few chords are, they're from Cornelius Cardew's Vietnam Sonata. There we go. That poem, as you know, was by Benjamin Zephaniah. And you probably know that he turned down the OBE. He refused to accept the OBE in 2003. So then he wrote a long letter, a long article for The Guardian, explaining his position, which you can Google. But one or two things he said in it worth repeating. So he says, well, he begins by saying, I woke up on the morning of November 13th, wondering how the government could be overthrown and what could replace it. And then I noticed a letter from the Prime Minister's office. It said, the Prime Minister has asked me to inform you in strict confidence that he has in mind on the occasion of the forthcoming list of New Year's honours to submit your name to the Queen with the recommendation that Her Majesty may be graciously pleased to approve that you be appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire. So Benjamin goes on to say, me? I thought, OBE me? Up yours, I thought. So then he carries on, I am not one of those who are obsessed with their roots, and I'm certainly not suffering from a crisis of identity. My obsession is about the future and the political rights of all people. Benjamin Zephaniah, OBE? No way, Mr. Blair. No way, Mrs. Queen. I am profoundly anti-empire. So he goes on. And he kind of embraces a bit this idea of the Queen as this grandmother or mother of the nation figure, which is completely shattered by Charles. Anyway, he says, and hey, Her Majesty may be graciously pleased to lay all that empire stuff on me. Why can't she write to me herself? Let's cut out the middleman. She knows me. The last time we met, it was at a concert I was hosting. She came backstage to meet me. That didn't bother me. Lots of people visit my dressing room after performances. Me and the South African performers I was working with that night thought it rather funny that we had a royal groupie. She's a bit stiff, but she's a nice old lady. Let me make it clear, I have nothing against her or the royal family. It is the institution of the monarchy that I loathe so much. The monarchy that still refuses to apologize for sanctioning slavery. The truth is, I think OBE's compromise writers and poets and laureates suddenly go soft. So he goes on. So he ends, you can't fool me, Mr. Blair. You want to privatize us all. You want to send us to war. You stay silent when we need you to speak for us, preferring to be the voice of the US. You have lied to us, and you continue to lie to us, and you have poured the working class dream of a fair, compassionate, caring society down the dirty drain of empire. Stick it, Mr. Blair. and Mrs. Queen, stop going on about empire. Let's do something else. There we go. Clarion call for today. So, anyone else? Anyone else?
At the risk of
Overstaying your welcome.
Sorry?
It's at risk of overstaying your welcome.
Yes, exactly. Well, I meant overly going on about Benjamin Zephaniah. I have another poem, which is from it's from the same book of poetry that Bought and Sold was published in. So, in fact, it's the second poem after Bought and Sold, and it's called "What If," and it's a play on. Is it Rudyard Kipling who wrote "If" originally? So it's a play on that. What if? If you can keep your money when governments about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust your neighbor when they trust not you and they be very nosy too, if you can await the warm delights of summer, then summer comes and goes with sun not seen, and pay so much for drinking water, knowing that the water is unclean. If you seek peace in times of war creation, and you can see that oil merchants are to blame, if you can meet a pimp or politician and treat those two impostors just the same, if you cannot bear disunited nations, and you think this new world order is a trick, if you've ever tried to build good race relations and watch bad policing mess your work up quick, if you can make one heap of all your savings and risk buying a small house and a plot, then sit back and watch the economy inflating, then have to deal with the negative equity you've got. If you can force your mind and body to continue when all the social services have gone, if you struggle on when there is nothing in you except the knowledge that justice cannot be wrong, if you can speak the truth to common people or walk with kings and queens and live no lie, if you can see how power can be evil and know that every censor is a spy, if you can fill an unforgiving lifetime with years of working hard to make ends meet, you may not be wealthy, but I am sure you will find that you can hold your head high as you walk the streets.
Yeah, good. I think we also demolished Kipling in 1918 in the First World War meetings. Because we did a job on the idea of lest we forget. And, Kipling had written very, some, I forget what they were called, fragments or something like that. And there was the idea, well, maybe he wasn't so jingoistic after all. But anyway, it's good that Benjamin Zephaniah does a job on him as well. So Alan's got his hand up again. So Alan.
Hi. Yeah, I found the words to the Million Songs poem. Doesn't say who wrote it. The time is here. The time is now. The time has come for you and for I. Seize the time in the here and now for the sake of that which yearns for the sky. Lay the claims. Transform the world for you and for I with a million songs.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Jim has a finger up. Okay, Jim. Unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. Can I do it for you?
You can try pressing down the space bar.
Spacebar, is it?
Computer, if he's on one, it unmutes him while he holds it down.
Oh right. Okay. Anyway, there you go, Jim. You're live.
Well, you can hear me. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right at the beginning, when the coronation was announced, I saw somebody sent me a big photograph of a bridge in Liverpool, and it said, "Down with the King, long live the working class." You know, and here in Wales, Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, was one of the parties invited to the coronation, and as a party, they refused on the basis that they couldn't take up this invitation at this time when the people of Wales were suffering severe cutbacks in all walks of life, particularly the health service and the economy, and people struggling here. And in Cardiff, there was quite a significant demonstration which didn't get much publicity. Not Our King, and that was quite a significant demonstration and a lot of opposition. And there has been a lot of opposition to Prince Charles. People forget that 1969, when he was being crowned King, you know, the Prince of Wales, two Welsh patriots set out to, you know, actually blow the train up that he was arriving in Carnarvon on, and unfortunately they killed themselves. But there is a lot of opposition, and the opposition is growing. The weekend of the coronation, I drove from South Wales right across Wales in my camper van, just to get away from the whole spectacle, and also to go to North Wales to see my daughter in a play. And I counted how many Union Jack flags were out, and I only counted 20. You know, and when you think of former celebrations like this, the amount of Union Jacks you see, so like it was quite significant to me that here in Wales there is a growing opposition to at this particular time, because people are very angry the way you know, on a daily basis they can see all their rights being eroded, and the health service here in Wales is really bad, considering, you know, we've got a Labour administration here in Wales as well, which the British used to say, well, if we did have a Labour Party, look to Wales, what's happening, because the Labour Party run the Assembly here. But that's just something that's a tactic just to divide us. The Chartists in their day, they were opposed to the King, and in 1848, Ernest Jones wrote "Song for the People," and I'll just read it. A song to the men, the working men, who long in their chains have sighed, 'neath the useless frown and the Lord and the crown and the churchman's greedy pride. There's strength in our bands and fate in our hands, if you knew how to use our power. The foul class rule of the knave and the fool needn't last for a single hour. Then down to the dust with title lust, and down with the gold king vile. For the world shall see that we shall be free, and free be the sister isle. And you know, when they talk about, you know, sovereignty, the Irish people are still being denied their sovereign right to United Ireland. Leslie mentioned it earlier. All the tricks have been pulled out of the bags to maintain their rule in Ireland. But opposition is growing, and we on a daily basis, you know, we've just got to battle away. We've just got to chip away at every opportunity arises, we should be taking a stand. And this discussion today has opened up, lots of ideas, and it bodes well for the future. That things are changing. Like I said, in recent years, all over Wales, in every major town, there has been rallies for independence, and that independence is based on the sentiment that the British government, Westminster, cannot provide the needs of the Welsh people, and that the only way that we can provide for our needs is through independence and taking the initiative ourselves, and establishing the people as the sovereign, power in Wales, not King Charles and all these cohorts and the rich. And this movement is growing. It's not getting much publicity, so we need to promote, all our different circles, all these, all this opposition which has taken place. In Ireland, you can see with Sinn Féin how the imperialists are trying to steer Sinn Féin into a pro-imperialist position. Not always successful, but we have to be aware of the contradictions within the different parties and the different groups that are emerging, and we have to play our role in creating unity and opposition. This is a very important period we're going through at the moment. The crisis, people on a daily basis, people are very angry, but it's turning that anger into sort of giving it a political voice that pushes the struggle forward. So great to hear everybody talking, and hopefully see everybody soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. That's great. Good to hear the voice of Wales and Ireland concentrated in one person. That's superb. So Keith has got his hand up. So Keith.
Hi everybody. Thanks for that contribution. That's just superb, especially that poem, Jim. It just got me thinking. I did a quick search, and I didn't realise that Gerard Winstanley, who was a leader of the Diggers in the 17th century at the same time as the Levellers, he actually wrote a ballad, and it looks like it's got relevance for today, particularly with so many people about to have their houses repossessed. You noble diggers all, stand up now, stand up now. You noble diggers all, stand up now. The vast land to maintain, sing cavaliers by name. Your digging does maintain, and persons all defame. Stand up now, stand up now. Your houses they pull down, stand up now, stand up now. Your houses they pull down, stand up now. Your houses they pull down, to fright your men in town, but the gentry must come down, and the poor shall wear the crown. Stand up now, diggers all. I think that's quite relevant, actually. And looking at it as well, that notion of the people gaining sovereignty, the poor shall wear the crown, I think that was quite a nice touch as well. The diggers don't really get much of a mention in these sorts of histories. It's usually all about the Levellers. But I just think that's quite interesting. I always admired Gerard Winstanley. Just a comment there, I thought.
That's a version of it. That's supposed to be the original version, which is longer than the one that's usually known. But I found that somewhere. Keith, you're muted. There we go. Were you saying something, Keith?
No, I was just reflecting. I didn't realise it was. I didn't realise there was so many verses. I'm entirely new to that. It's fascinating. I've always admired Win Stanby.
Yeah.
Never usually gets the same fulsome praise as the levelers do, but always interesting. Look back and see the relevance.
Good. There's another new message. Oh yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Any more? Roger, do you want to sort of make some concluding remarks from Truth and Memory?
Well, just I think it's been a brilliant discussion, and very big thanks to Leslie for giving that talk, and that it's good that work's going on and continues to go on. I think because I think that's really important to inform the fight that we have that work going on, and how this political system all works, because it's very easy for the ruling elite to try and channel the illusions into people should have another election. And in fact, I won't go into names, but that was, that tends to happen at these rallies, that they say what we need is an election now, but actually, an election is not going to solve anything. I think what's going to solve things is if people continue the fight to empower themselves, and very much Truth and Memory has people involved that are doing that in our area, and we're very pleased to be associated with all these people that are fighting for empowerment to present themselves as an alternative to the status quo and to the whole, as Alan says, the whole police power dictate, which is ignoring the people's concerns. And it was interesting that the doctors were on strike just a few days ago, and it's quite clear that the government not only it not only doesn't negotiate, it doesn't even listen to their concerns. So it's like on a level that the people have to make their own new arrangements to fight this and keep their, as Jim says, there are a lot of things going on. There's a lot of opposition, and we need to bring all that together. And I think one of the ways we do that is by having, fairly regular discussions where we go into matters very seriously. And I think the ad hoc committees have provided that kind of thing, where we've talked about the World War I, we talked about NATO. Our last one, I think, we talked about democracy, the fight to bring the democratic revolution to fruition, and the last one was on the Paris Commune and so on, and the significance of that, and Keith and many others here have been involved in that. So anyway, thanks for the contributions, and I think that's an impetus to carry that work on, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. Yeah. So thank everyone once again for participating. I can do no more really but endorse what everyone has said, and echo, underline, as it were, what Roger was saying about these discussions. In a way, they represent the new, or the possibilities of the new. Anyway, people being able to discuss these matters in depth, simply speaking things as they see them. And of course, there are people like Leslie who have done research into these, and we've had previous meetings similarly, and that's a major contribution as well. So it's possible to say we're in a transitional period, looking at taking a broad perspective. With the old institutions, including the monarchy, simply being dysfunctional. Like with Charles, he's always been known as a kind of meddling royal, that he has his views. So that's completely in contradiction with the picture of the monarchy they try to paint of someone being neutral and above politics. And the fact that he's so engaged with this promotion of soft power, which dates back, well, at least to Tony Blair, the New Labour idea that you have soft power and hard power, and these are two ways of imposing the imperialist will on the world, basically. So it's a call to us to work for something new. It's partly by dissemination of what we know and discussing, but it's also by continuing this work. And anyway, thanks once again for participating. I think this has been quite a significant event. So thanks to everyone, and I'm sure it won't be too long before we have the next one, whether it's joint or severally. Zoom meetings mean we can all join together now. It's wonderful. Okay. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
I'm going to close this down now. Okay. Here we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.